Cops of Reddit, what is the scariest situation you've ever been in? Scariest day/call I've ever had was a medical call involving a 3-year-old girl. My first department I worked for required all officers be first responder certified basic medical training. Not enough to be an EMT or medic, but above first aid. We would normally respond to medical calls until the EMTs arrived just to secure the scene. This particular call came out as a 3-year-old girl having a seizure. The location of the call was at a large hotel/resort. I worked at a beach. The closest vehicle access was the front entrance, and I had to go on foot to the actual room. When I pulled up to the front, dispatch upgraded the call and informed the girl had just gone into cardiac arrest. I started running to the room, which was nowhere near the front of the hotel, and after finding it, the family was in complete hysterics. I saw the little girl on the ground in the kitchen, who was still seizing, however could see she was turning blue in the face. The mom grabbed me and started screaming to save her daughter. I hadn't performed CPR since the academy. I told the mom and everyone to go out into the hallway and for someone to run to the front to guide the EMTs when they arrived. Suddenly, it was now just me and the girl in the room. The gravity of the situation suddenly hit me. There was no way EMS would get there in time to help her. I paused for about 10 seconds and just tried to collect myself, or froze up. It's cliche, but those 10 seconds felt like an absolute eternity. Somehow, I snapped out of it and began CPR. Amazingly, with the first compression, she suddenly let out a giant cough and started breathing again. I've been a police officer for 5 years now, responded to countless fatal wrecks, shootings, stabbings, murder scenes etc. But nothing was as scary as sitting there on the floor next to that girl knowing, if I didn't do something she was going to die. I'd just like to point out that among the top several stories in this thread right now, the vast majority involve no physical danger to the cop whatsoever. Their biggest fear is the safety of others. That's pretty special. Ex-police officer here. You have hit the nail on the head. Every cop knows that their own life can be in danger while they do their job. Each will act accordingly to ensure that they do not do anything stupid. Basic precautions and gut feeling can usually keep you safe. The scariest thing a cop can feel is helplessness when watching harm come to others. Protect and serve is a great responsibility. I responded to a single vehicle crash where the guy was in the middle of the street. When I get there still thinking this guy was needing help, he starts yelling gibberish and grabs his two kids 1 and 3. He then starts yelling at me and reaching into the car like he is going for a weapon. I drew and sighted up on him and he intentionally moved his kids into my line of fire. I couldn't just holster because he was reaching in the center console like he had a gun. I couldn't shoot or use AUX/taser because the kids were right there. I had a split second to process this information and make a decision. I decided to sight onto his pelvic girdle, which is not a horrible shot placement. When my backup got there a few seconds later, I decided the kid's safety had priority over the unknown weapon, so I rushed him in the car. Short struggle and got both girls, who were thankfully completely unharmed. He did have a weapon in the car and I'm pretty sure he was looking for it to be in the center console he was reaching in. Thankfully it was elsewhere. It was so intense because I had such a short time to figure out what to do. I'm glad I made a good decision and the girls and I went home safe. I'm not a cop, but my boss used to be one, and he told me this. Cops gets called to check up on a guy who hasn't shown up to work in a few days and his family haven't heard from him either. They show up to his apartment and stumble across him. He shot himself in the face. Blood everywhere, alcohol bottles everywhere. The gunshot or impact or something had even blown his eyes out. Horrible mess. Apparently he had gotten real drunk and probably some other things and decided to kill himself. Boss calls it in and him a few others who were called in are waiting for the coroner or whoever is supposed to come and all that cop stuff. They're waiting in the doorway to his bedroom just kind of shooting the shit, his words not mine, and all of a sudden this dead guy just sits up in bed and starts attempting to talk. This guy who looked dead, hole in his freaking face, eyes gone, blood everywhere, sits up and starts mumbling. My boss, who had done tactical training with the FBI, said he scared him so much he almost drew his gun and shot the guy thinking he was a zombie or something. Turns out he hadn't shot himself in a vital way, like some Fight Club stuff or something. My boss wasn't very specific on that. He had drank so much, and was probably so doped up from script pills, that he had no idea what happened. Mind you, he had only shot himself the night prior. He hadn't been laying in bed for a few days bleeding out. I can only imagine what would race through my head if a guy who looked dead in every sense of the word just stood up while I was off guard and started groaning and mumbling. Scary stuff. I attended an in-one on a hang-up where nothing was heard. When I showed up, we heard a scream and kicked the door in. Guy got coked out his mind and was torturing his wife. He was waiting for us and slit her throat, then attacked us. She lived thankfully fat around her neck. Keep him from cutting the artery. Had to shoot the guy. It wasn't exactly scary, but when you come through something like that, you look back and have to say holy shoot. One of the scarier things was a car crash. Guy was crushed in the car and his arm was out. He was screaming, but couldn't pull him out. He died before EMS got there. I was so scared they weren't going to make it in time, and well, I guess they didn't. PS, upvotes to op, because we don't really have a way to tell civilians these stories, because we can't be anonymous. Friend of mine. He was a state trooper, and had been for years. He had been part of a bust that involved 30 stolen IROC cameras. He had changed tires for people, caught a guy going 130 miles per hour, and then tried to pay his ticket with cash, caught a 31 DUI. He had seen a lot. One night he pulls a guy over who was swerving a bit. He didn't really suspect DUI, but he wanted to be sure. He pulls him over and calls in the plates and goes to talk to the guy, get his license, etc. As soon as he turned around, the guy pulled a gun and got out. My friend turned back to find himself staring down the barrel of this guy's handgun with no way out. He soon learned of this guy's warrants and how he wasn't going back. The guy got him down on his knees. The guy keeps talking for a minute, then goes to execute him. He pulls the trigger with the gun held to my friend's head and it jams. The gun doesn't go off. He quickly subdues the man and arrests him. The guy's laying on the ground crying. My friend gets back up and this guy goes to prison. My friend was never able to return to patrols. He would freak whenever he had to pull someone over. It ended his career. Years later he went to prison and met the guy and forgave him for that night. I guess to get closure. My dad is a cop. Obviously he always tried to downplay the danger of situations to my sister and me, so he wouldn't scare us. But one morning he came home shook. I was a teenager at the time, so I asked him to tell me what happened. This was a while ago, so some of the details might be off, but the general idea is there. He and his partner were doing a graveyard shift, and there was a seemingly abandoned car on the side of the road. They got out to see if anyone was in it. My dad was first, while his partner stayed in the car to call in the radio report. I'm not too sure how this next part happened, but as he was approaching the car he realized there were multiple people hiding in the car. All of them were super strung out. As he's going to back away to wait for his partner, he hears his partner running over. He identifies himself as police to the people in the car and asks if there are any weapons in the car and things like that. His partner comes around and they start getting people out of the car and they see a gun. Okay, kinda a biggie. His partner goes to start talking to the people in the car to see whose it was. ECT. In that time, I'm fuzzy here. One of the people had gotten away from the group. My dad was talking to the driver near the front of the car, and his partner was talking to a few others towards the back. The person my dad was questioning eyes went white and he kinda backed up. He turned around to see why, and a man had a handgun pointed to the back of his head. He's a cop, so obviously he's had guns pointed at him before, but never that close. Thankfully, he is a beast and he started talking to him to calm him down and just telling him to take his finger off the trigger. While he was doing that, he put his hands up slowly towards his face in the I surrender position, and the second the guy took his finger off the trigger he stuck his finger behind the trigger, called over for his partner, and they handcuffed him. Obviously it's terrifying that if the driver hadn't widened his eyes he never would have known, but I'm thankful every day that he acted quickly. I rather like having him around. I have two stories from a former teacher of mine. /r/story 1. He responded to an assault where a woman's boyfriend killed her and then dragged her daughter out into the woods and beat her head in with a rock. He was the first responder and the man fled the scene, so he focused on saving the girl, but he couldn't. She was 9 years old and watched the life drain from her eyes. He said that was the worst thing he's ever seen, holding a little girl in his arms as her breathing stops and her iris turned grey. /r/r/story 2. He gets a phone call and his sergeant says, "You need to get down here, it's John. Something has happened." John was his partner and best friend at the time. So as he's speeding down to where the sergeant told him to go, he calls multiple people asking them what happened, but they won't tell him. When he arrives at the scene, he sees John's cruiser completely destroyed and charred. He pushes through the paramedics hoping to see John on a stretcher, but has not. So he looks into the wrecked cruiser and sees a charred, burnt lump. At that moment he realized that he was looking at his best friend who was completely unrecognizable. I'm not a cop, but my co-worker's father is, and he hit me with this whopper of a story once. For some background reference, I live in Austin and all these occurrences were with the Austin Police Department and happened in 1978. An APD officer pulled over a blue Mustang for not having a rear license plate. A man and woman inside. The officer tries to run the couple through dispatch, but the system is down, so he lets them go with a citation. After letting them go, however, dispatch lets him know that the man has an outstanding warrant. The officer pulled the couple back over and the man, David Lee Powell, knew his arrest was imminent. Crawling into the backseat, he loaded his AK-47 and opened fire as the officer approached. Mortally wounded, the officer called for backup before dying on the side of the road. Officer Villegas, my co-worker's father, hears on the radio that an officer is down only 8 blocks away and takes off straight for where he thinks the killer is headed, the highway. Before arriving, however, he finds a blue Mustang in an apartment complex parking lot with its lights off, cruising at a really low speed. He peels into the parking lot, blocking the only exit off, and called for backup. Then a storm of bullets pound his police car, some from Powell's AK-47, some from his lady accomplice's pistol. As they are exchanging fire, Powell hurls a small oval-sized object towards the front of Officer Villegas' police cruiser. To the officer's horror, it was a hand grenade, and he was sure death was imminent. He explained his last thought being of his wife and kids, and how he was so sad he wouldn't be able to see them again, and that being the scariest moment in his 38 years on the force. But the grenade didn't go off, and Powell and his lady friend were out of ammo. As backup arrived, Powell took off behind the apartment complex into the woods, whereas the lady accomplice attempted to hide in a ditch. Seeing her in the ditch attempting to reload, Officer Villegas ran up to her and kicked her square in the face, shattering her jaw. Powell was later caught in the woods after a manhunt and received the death penalty for his actions that day. Edit. Found the case super interesting read if you got the time. Probably one of the craziest cop stories I have ever heard. http://clarkprosecutor.org/html/death/us/Powell1216. HTM. I'm not a cop, but my cousin is, and his story made news all over New York last year. While on the job, he got stabbed in the head by a schizophrenic man, narrowly missing a main artery. He's doing much better now and recently got promoted to detective. Here's a few links. http://cityroom blogs nightimes.com/2012/04/17/police officer stabbed in neck /http://cityroom blogs nightimes.com/2012/04/18/ stabbed officer in good spirits commissioner says / cops write by far the longest responses on average that I've ever seen on /r/AskReddit. BF is a cop in a dangerous city. He has a lot of WTF stories involving being punched into unconsciousness, falling off a roof while chasing a person, etc. His most WTF story involves a man who was shot in a drug dispute in the jaw. Everything below his nose was blown off, and wobbly bits of tooth and tongue stuck to his neck. The man, sinew and blood flopping obscenely where his mouth should be, survived long enough to run into the street and die on the hood of my BF parked police car, which he then needed to scrub. My dad told me a story about when he was city cop in Vancouver. There was a call to a domestic disturbance at a house. He walked up to the door and a guy opened it with a shotgun pointed inches from my dad's face. He said he almost shoot his pants right there. He looked the guy right in the eye and said, "I sent this hash 123. The guy says, "No, this is hash 125. So my dad says, "Oh sorry, wrong address," and turns around and walks back to his car. He thought the moment he turned around he was gonna get shoot, but thankfully he didn't. About 10 years I worked as an undercover narc. I set up a deal with a meth cook to make me a batch of speed. I was going to supply the ephedrine and he was going to make a pound and take a cut for his services. My team procures a few cases of ephedrine pills and my partner and I go in to make the deal. We had about 15 other cops in the area as the arrest team. My partner are wired up and go to his house. He lives in a detached garage in the back of the house, which is set back about 50 yards from the street. The place is tiny and barely fits a queen bed and a dresser. My partner and I go in with the ephedrine and start bullshitting with the guy, who is alone at this point. We are trying to get info where his lab equipment is. A few minutes later there's a knock on the door and the suspect opens it, and there is some giant tatted down white supremacist paralee. He comes in and breaks out a speed pipe and starts smoking. We're talking about girls and the paralee says something, and my partner says, "Copy that," which is cop slang for "I hear you." I glare at him, and the paralee sort of gets quiet and stares at my partner. Then he passes the speed pipe to my partner and says, "You're up." My partner says, "Nah bro, I'm code 4. More cop slang for imo. K. The paralee says, "What the frick did you just say?" I realize our cover is blown, and I pull my gun out and yell "police" and give the signal over the wire that shoot just went sideways. The paralee jumps in between the bed and wall as has reaching in his pocket. The cook runs out of the garage. I circled around the bed to engage the paralee, while my partner gives chase on the other guy. The paralee crawls under the bed and I'm yelling at him to show me hands, or I'm going to shoot him. I'm about ready to shoot into the bed, just as I see a bag of speed come flying out from under the bed and his hands pop out too. The arrest team comes in, and we take the paralee into custody. He has a loaded gun in his pocket, but said he couldn't get to it because B was on his stomach as B crawled under the bed. We caught the other guy a few minutes later. TL. Doctor doing undercover drug deal. My partner talks like a cop and blows our cover. Almost gets me killed.